The Great Deception: How Cultural Exchange Shaped Our Religious Identity and Why It Matters Today. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining me here today. I recently had the extraordinary privilege of interviewing Dr. Hamid Everett, whose revolutionary work in biblical archaeology and ancient Near Eastern studies is not just transforming academic understanding, it's shattering our fundamental assumptions about cultural identity itself. Dr. Everett isn't merely an academic, he's a visionary whose research bridges millennia, connecting ancient wisdom to our modern struggles with authenticity, belonging, and purpose. His work illuminates shadows that have darkened our understanding for centuries, bringing light to corners of history that reshape how we see ourselves today. What struck me most profoundly about my conversation with Dr. Everett was his rare ability to weave together meticulous academic research with soul stirring cultural relevance. His insights don't just live in dusty academic journals, they breathe life into how we understand ourselves, particularly for Black professionals navigating complex cultural landscapes in today's fragmented world. We've been told a story, a powerful, pervasive story about how cultural and religious identities form. We've been taught that authentic traditions develop in isolation, preserved like precious artifacts, untouched by outside influence. We imagine ancient Israelites developing their religious identity in a vacuum, guided solely by divine inspiration and internal theological evolution. But what if this fundamental assumption is not just slightly wrong, but catastrophically, dangerously misguided? This is the earth shattering insight Dr. Everett shared during our conversation. The development of Israelite religious identity, the very foundation of Western religious thought, was profoundly shaped not primarily by isolated divine revelation, but through vibrant, complex intercultural exchanges across the ancient Near East. The biblical narratives we've treated as hermetically sealed were actually porous, absorbing and transforming influences from Egypt, Mesopotamia, Canaan, and beyond. This isn't just academic trivia. This revelation demolishes everything we think we know about cultural authenticity and religious purity, and it has profound, liberating implications for how we navigate our own identity journeys today. Picture the Early Bronze Age Levant, a time of remarkable transformation that Dr. Everett has studied extensively. Imagine standing at the crossroads of ancient Canaan as cities rise from dust, as trade routes stretch like veins across deserts and mountains. Society faced crushing challenges: fragmentation, inadequate infrastructure, limited technology. Sound familiar? These ancient communities confronted obstacles not unlike those we face today. But here's what's fascinating: they didn't retreat into cultural isolation. They didn't build walls to preserve some imagined purity. Instead, they embraced exchange. They absorbed ceramic technologies from neighboring regions, incorporated metalworking techniques from distant lands. They didn't just borrow ideas, they transformed them, adapted them, made them their own. At Megiddo, a site many of you might know as biblical Armageddon, archaeologists have uncovered massive public buildings that merged local traditions with foreign architectural elements. At Tel Kabri, wall paintings show clear Aegean influence, evidence of artistic exchange across the Mediterranean. These weren't signs of cultural weakness or inauthenticity. They were innovations that strengthened these societies, allowing them to flourish in challenging times. What's revolutionary about this evidence is how directly it contradicts our cherished myths about cultural purity. The influx of new ethnic groups, described by what archaeologists call the Amorite hypothesis, didn't dilute cultural identity, it enriched it. It catalyzed innovation. It created resilience in the face of change. But the story grows even more fascinating. Dr. Everett's research reveals that ancient Canaanites didn't just borrow architectural styles from Egypt. They fundamentally reimagined them. Imagine the audacity. A small, developing society adopting elements from the most powerful empire of its day, not in submission, but in creative transformation. At sites like Ai and Irani, buildings incorporated Egyptian style elements while serving distinctly local purposes. Administrative technologies, pottery bearing Sarek names, ivory, and stone labels, were adopted not as mere imitation, but as tools of local empowerment. These weren't acts of cultural surrender, they were bold statements of cultural confidence. Early contacts between Canaanite and Egyptian societies, facilitated by trade and migration, led to the construction of impressive public buildings and fortifications and the adoption of writing systems that would transform how knowledge was preserved and transmitted. These exchanges didn't weaken cultural boundaries, they made them more creative, more adaptive, more resilient. Perhaps most moving is Dr. Everett's research on burial customs in Middle Bronze Age Cisjordan. As societies grew more complex, they faced the profound challenge of maintaining community cohesion while acknowledging social differences. Their solution? They developed varied burial practices, pit and cist burials, constructed tombs, rock cut cave tombs that reflected both social position and community belonging. These weren't just pragmatic solutions to practical problems. They were profound statements about what mattered, both individual identity and community connection. As society evolved, burial practices incorporated both imported and indigenous traditions, weaving together a rich tapestry of meaning that honored both innovation and continuity. What emerges from these ancient stories is a profound truth that Dr. Everett articulated with breathtaking clarity. Intercultural exchange wasn't peripheral to ancient identity formation, it was central. The material culture that archaeologists uncover, the pottery, the buildings, the burial sites, tells us that identity has never been about purity. It has always been about creative engagement with the world around us. This insight transforms how we approach biblical texts today. Modern approaches to biblical criticism, gender studies, post colonial theory, material culture analysis reveal how marginalized voices and power dynamics have shaped religious texts and traditions. By understanding the historical context and material evidence behind biblical narratives, we gain a richer, more honest understanding of these ancient texts. But here's where Dr. Everett's work becomes truly revolutionary. It speaks directly to our modern identity crises. It confronts the toxic myth that authenticity requires purity. It challenges the dangerous notion that cultural exchange somehow dilutes identity rather than strengthening it. Think about what this means for Black professionals and entrepreneurs navigating complex cultural landscapes today. The narrative of cultural purity has often been weaponized to question the authenticity of Black cultural expressions that incorporate elements from diverse traditions. But Dr. Everett's research reveals that such exchange has always been a source of strength and innovation, not a compromise of authenticity. When a Black entrepreneur draws inspiration from multiple cultural traditions, they're not betraying authenticity. They're participating in the most authentic human tradition of all, creative cultural exchange. When Black professionals move fluidly between different cultural contexts, they're not compromising their identity. They're expressing the fullness of human adaptability that has characterized our species' greatest achievements. Understanding this historical reality empowers us to see our own stories as part of a larger dynamic process of cultural formation and resilience. It validates the complex, multifaceted nature of identity and celebrates the creativity and adaptability that has always characterized human cultural expression. In a world increasingly divided by rigid identity politics, Dr. Everett's research offers a liberating alternative: the recognition that all cultures, even those we consider most foundational to our civilization, were formed through dynamic exchange and adaptation. This doesn't erase cultural distinctiveness, it honors the creative processes that make cultural expression meaningful. For Black professionals and entrepreneurs, this perspective transforms the very narrative of their journeys. It suggests that navigating multiple cultural contexts isn't a betrayal of authenticity, but a continuation of the most profound pattern in human cultural development. It validates complexity rather than demanding simplicity. It celebrates creativity rather than enforcing conformity. As Dr. Everett emphasized in our conversation, understanding the historical reality behind cultural formation empowers us to see our own stories differently. Identity isn't a static artifact to be preserved in a museum case, it's a living, breathing creation that gains strength through engagement with the world around us. So I challenge you today: how might your professional and personal journey transform if you abandon the myth of cultural purity? What creative possibilities might open if you embrace the ancient wisdom that the strongest identities are those formed through exchange, not isolation? What burdens might you set down if you recognize that authenticity has never been about purity, but about creative engagement? The evidence is clear. The archaeological record speaks. The ancient world whispers a truth we desperately need to hear. We are all, each of us, products of cultural exchange. Our religious traditions, our social structures, our very sense of self, all have been shaped by encounters across boundaries. And rather than weakening us, this reality enriches us, connecting us to a human tradition of creativity and resilience that spans thousands of years. The walls we build to protect cultural purity are not just unnecessary, they're contrary to the very processes that created the cultures we seek to preserve. The boundaries we defend so fiercely were never as rigid as we imagine them to be. So leave here today with this radical truth: you don't need to choose between authenticity and exchange. You don't need to sacrifice connection for identity. The most authentic expression of your humanity might be found precisely in those moments of creative cultural engagement that our modern myths have taught you to fear. This is Dr. Kamid Everett's profound gift to us: not just a new understanding of ancient texts, but a new framework for approaching our own identities in an increasingly complex world. It's time we embrace the wisdom of our ancestors, who knew that strength comes not from isolation, but from creative exchange across boundaries. The choice is yours. Will you cling to the comforting myth of cultural purity, or will you embrace the liberating truth of creative exchange that has shaped human identity since the dawn of civilization? Thank you